The base clock read 11:57 p.m. when the metallic chime echoed through the empty barracks. She wasn't expecting anyone at that hour, much less a direct order from him. "War room, now," said the deep voice on the internal radio. Her heart raced, not from fear of an unexpected briefing, but from the weight of the name that spoke it. The general. The man who for months had maintained the required distance with the impeccable coolness of a leader, but whose eyes, on the rare occasions they met hers, carried something not recorded in military manuals. The cold mist of dawn seeped through the walls as she walked through the silent corridor, each step echoing as if the entire base were listening. As she entered, the smell of old paper and bitter coffee enveloped her. Maps spread out on the table, dim lighting, and he, alone, waiting. And in that moment, even before a word, she knew. This wasn't just about strategy. He didn't ask her to sit. He simply pointed to a spot on the map, near the most remote and dangerous sector of the Arctic. "I want you to go there at dawn, alone," he said without looking up. But there was something in the timbre of his voice, a barely perceptible hesitation, that sounded like a request disguised as an order. She tried to argue, but he moved closer, bracing his hands on the table, and the distance between them became dangerously short. The silence in the room seemed to amplify every breath. That was when she realized this mission wasn't in the protocol. There was no record, no witnesses, and somehow it was connected to something only he and she seemed to understand. As she left, the door closed with a click, and she knew that, whatever path she took from here, there would be no turning back. If this story has kept you hooked so far, just imagine what comes next. Like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. She'd noticed that the early morning chill seemed denser that night, as if the entire base had held its breath along with her. As she left her barracks, the narrow fluorescent-lit corridor flickered, casting long shadows on the metal walls. The echo of her boots against the floor reverberated, betraying each step toward a destination she knew, deep down, would be irreversible. Outside, the wind cut her skin like invisible blades, and the snow accumulated on the windowsills reminded her that, in this place, the world was white, cold, and unforgiving. Even so, what made her hesitate wasn't the hostile climate, but the certainty that this call had nothing to do with military maneuvers. As she approached the war room door, the silence became almost palpable, as if even the machines had stopped to listen to what was about to happen. When she pushed open the heavy door, she was greeted by a gentle warmth from a radiator in the corner, contrasting with the chill still clinging to her face. The room was subdued, illuminated only by a lamp on the central table, where detailed maps lay spread out, marked by hasty notes and red dots that cut through the Arctic ice like wounds on paper. The general stood there, motionless, with the impeccable posture he always maintained, but something was different. He wasn't wearing his heavy military coat, just his fitted shirt, the sleeves rolled up to the elbow. This lack of formality was more unsettling than any battle order. She stood before him, standing straight, waiting for his usual firm, neutral voice to fill the air. But what came was a silence that dragged on for too long, long enough for her to feel the weight of his gaze settle on her, as if searching for something that couldn't be said. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost too deep for his usual tone. "There's something I need you to do. It's not official. It's not protocol." Those words, more than any instruction, made her heart race. He pointed to an isolated spot on the map, a remote area no soldier would want to patrol alone. "Tomorrow at dawn you will come here. Don't carry a radio, don't ask questions." She kept a straight face, trying to understand, but something inside her stirred. This was no ordinary mission, and the fact that she had been chosen, she a simple soldier with no medals, raised dangerous questions. The distance between them seemed to diminish with each passing second, not physically, but through an invisible tension that filled the air. He stepped aside, as if the prolonged eye contact had become unbearable, and slammed the map shut, almost as if to end the conversation. "That's all for today, you're dismissed." But his voice trailed off on the last word, and she realized there was something hidden there, an urgency unexplainable in words, something that perhaps had more to do with who they were to each other than any mission. As she stepped outside, She felt the cold outside pale in comparison to what that silent command had instilled within her. The day dawned with a white, heavy sky, as if the horizon itself wanted to hide what was to come. She woke before the bugle call, not because she wanted to, but because sleep found no place amid the turmoil the previous night's order had provoked. She donned her uniform in silence, feeling the extra weight of each layer of fabric, as if carrying with her the responsibility of a secret no one else knew. The sound of the zipper, the adjustment of her boots, the precise fit of her holster, everything seemed slower, more charged with awareness. Outside, the base was still asleep, with little movement other than the night guards and the distant rumble of a generator. Breath came in thick clouds, and each step left deep impressions in the freshly fallen snow. She crossed the courtyard with the map, folded in her inner coat pocket, guarding it as if it were more valuable than any weapon. The destination was clear, but the reason remained a burning enigma. With every meter away from the safety of the gates, the silence grew more absolute. The wind whistled through the metal structures, and as she crossed the last fence, she had the strange sensation of leaving behind not only the base, but also the part of her that still believed in the rules. The path to the point, marked on the map, passed through an area known for its cracks hidden beneath the ice. Any misstep could be fatal, but there was something inside her, perhaps the same instinct that had kept her alive on past missions, that drove her forward. The faint light of dawn was beginning to tinge the horizon when she reached a series of rock formations, partially covered in snow. She recognized the place immediately. It wasn't on official maps, but she'd heard whispered stories about it in the corridors. They said it was used in the 1970s for covert operations, even before the base existed, an underground shelter, built to withstand explosions and storms, but no one spoke openly about it. Approaching the entrance, half hidden beneath a mound of ice, she felt the air shift. A cold draft, stronger than the wind, escaped from within. She removed her gloves to touch the rusted metal surface of the door and realized it was unlocked. She pushed hard, and the sound of scraping metal echoed like a roar muffled by the ice. Inside, the smell was a mixture of mildew and iron, and the walls revealed layers of peeling paint. She took a few steps down the narrow corridor, lit only by the light escaping from the opening. The echo of her boots multiplied, and every shadow seemed to move with her. It was then that she realized she was not alone. A figure appeared at the end of the corridor, standing still as if expecting her. The dark uniform, the erect posture. It was him, the general. But something was different. There was no commanding expression on his face, no professional cool. The look in his eyes was that of someone carrying a huge weight and about to share it with someone who could never tell the truth. And in that moment, she understood that this mission wasn't about the Arctic, nor about military strategy. It was about something buried there amidst ice, iron, and secrets, something that could change the fate of both of them. She kept her pace steady, but every meter that closed the distance between them felt like a kilometer. The sound of her breathing inside her helmet was too loud, and she realized that for some reason the general didn't move as she approached. He just stood there, motionless, as if pinned to the ground by something stronger than gravity. When she finally got close enough to make out his features, she noticed something she'd never seen before: vulnerability. It wasn't fear, generals don't show fear, but a rare kind of hesitation, almost as if he were about to give away a part of himself he'd never let anyone touch. He broke the silence with the same low voice he'd used the night before. "You need to see this." He turned on his heel and began walking down the narrow hallway, forcing her to follow. The air inside seemed heavier, permeated with dampness and a chill that came not just from the temperature, but from something seeping into the bones. The light streaming through the door faded as they walked, replaced by a darkness broken only by old, yellow-glowing lamps hanging from the low ceiling. Rounding the last corner, she saw a reinforced door, unlike any other, bearing signs of having been opened and closed countless times over the decades. He removed a heavy key from his inside coat pocket, the sound of metal clanking in the silence, and inserted it into the lock. The sharp click as it turned echoed through the hallway. As the door opened, a blast of even colder air escaped, bringing with it a strong, almost suffocating metallic smell. What was inside wasn't what she expected. There were no secret weapons or high-tech equipment. The space was small, almost claustrophobic, and in the center on an iron stand sat a dark, ancient wooden box, deeply scarred, as if it had been dragged several meters across the ice. Around it, the floor was scratched with lines that looked like maps or hand-drawn coordinates. She approached, but before she could touch it, he intervened, raising his hand in a restrained gesture. "Don't touch. Not yet." The tension between them grew with each passing second. She sensed that the object was the core of the entire mystery, but also that there was something about it that could destroy her or him, if revealed at the wrong moment. He watched her with a look that blended command and pleading, as if silently telling her that this wasn't just about military orders. She realized she was in forbidden territory, not only because of the base's security, but because of something far more dangerous, the thin line that separated what they were as soldiers and what they were about to become as people. Without warning, a distant crash reverberated through the walls, sending dust falling from the ceiling. He turned quickly, his face once again taking on the urgent tone of a leader in the midst of a crisis. "We don't have much time," he said, and this time his gaze never left hers. It was in that instant that she understood that what was in that box had a direct connection to them both, and that somehow her life had been tied to his long before that night. The corridor trembled slightly with the echo of the crash, and for a moment she felt as if the very ice around her was alive, breathing, reacting to their presence. The general approached the box with measured steps, pulling a worn leather glove from his pocket. He placed it on his right hand and with a slow gesture touched the scarred surface of the wood, as if that simple touch could awaken something that had been dormant for decades. The rough sound of his fingers sliding across the relief seemed louder than it should have been, as if the room amplified any noise. He didn't look at her as he spoke, but his voice sounded different, less rigid, more personal, filled with memories she hadn't yet recognized. This box was taken from the ice before the base even existed, and was kept here because no one knew what to do with what was inside. Her breath quickened. Part of her wanted to ask, part wanted to run away, but neither option felt safe. The general stepped back just enough for her to see the rusty locks that sealed the lid. There were 3 of them, each with a different mechanism, as if designed to ensure they wouldn't be opened by accident. Only 2 men have had the keys. One died over 30 years ago. The other is me. She felt the weight of those words as if she'd received a silent order. This could not be told to anyone. She took a step forward, unsure if it was curiosity or something deeper. His proximity, the warmth that contrasted with the chill of the room, the quick glance she caught when he finally looked up. It all blended into a whirlwind of feelings she knew she shouldn't have. But there was an invisible energy there, connecting them, as if the box were more than a military secret. It was an inescapable link between them. The distant sound of boots running down the hallway brought them both back to reality. He turned abruptly, his expression grim and his tone commanding again. "Get out of here now, no one can know you were here." But before she could take a step, the light flickered and went out, plunging them into complete darkness. The silence that followed was broken only by a metallic sound coming from inside the box, as if something inside had moved on its own. She felt her heart pound against her ribs. It wasn't just her content that was alive that night. It was also something inside her that, until then, she had managed to bury beneath her uniform and discipline, and she knew that, from that moment on, neither could return to their former selves. The darkness seemed to pulse around them, as if each passing second made the air heavier and the space tighter. She heard the sharp sound of the general pulling something from his belt, a field flashlight. The narrow beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating suspended dust particles that floated like tiny golden sparks. He focused his focus on the box, and the wood now seemed more alive, the marks and scratches revealing symbols she hadn't noticed before, engraved with almost artisanal precision. They weren't military markings, but ancient inscriptions, worn by time, but charged with a meaning that defied logic. He approached slowly, kneeling beside the box. The rusted locks gleamed in the light, and for a moment she noticed a barely perceptible tremor in his hands, not of fear, but of something that might have been anticipation or reverence. "This isn't equipment. "And it's no ordinary artifact either," he said, his eyes never leaving the wood. "What's inside has decided life and death before, and it can do so again." A new metallic sound, louder than the last, echoed from within, as if something had slammed against the inner walls. She instinctively took a step back, but the general remained motionless, as if he had been waiting for it to happen. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound, because it carried the feeling that it was aware of their presence. The tension wasn't just coming from the box. She could feel the heat of his body even a meter away, and every breath they shared in the dim light seemed to create an invisible bridge between two worlds that should never touch, duty and desire. He looked up and, for the first time, let the flashlight's light fully capture his eyes. There was no command in them, only a silent warning, and something that bordered on confession. A louder crash reverberated outside, and the ground shook enough to send dust flying from the ceiling. He jumped to his feet, approaching her, and said in a low, almost urgent tone, "Whatever happens now, you need to stay close to me. Understand?" She nodded, feeling the weight of the promise implicit in those words. This wasn't just military protection. It was something deeper, more risky, and as forbidden as the box before them. When he turned off the flashlight to preserve the battery, pitch blackness enveloped them once again. And in that moment, alone in the darkness, she felt the light brush of his hand as it touched her arm, guiding her toward the exit. There was no protocol that could have foreseen this. There was no military code capable of erasing what that touch had awakened, and without them realizing it, the true danger was no longer locked in the box. It was loose between them. The narrow corridor became a tunnel of metallic echoes as they hurried forward, guided only by the firm touch of his hand on her arm and the memory of the path they had taken minutes before. Outside, the distant sound of alarms began to grow, as if the entire base had awakened to something they didn't yet understand. Emergency lights flickered on the low ceiling, painting the scene with red flashes and shadows that moved too quickly to be mere reflections. He didn't say where they were going, and she didn't dare ask. The hurried pace of his steps and the tension in his grip were enough to tell him. There was urgency, and any deviation could be fatal. When they reached the shelter's main door, he slammed it shut and turned the lock, as if to prevent anything from leaving or entering. The gesture was quick, but the way he looked away betrayed that what was left behind wasn't just a secret, it was a living threat. The icy wind greeted them outside, biting their faces and bringing with it the thick smell of snow about to fall. The open field ahead seemed vaster and more hostile than it had been on the way there, and the strong gusts made it difficult to see beyond a few meters. Even so, he kept a firm hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the uneven terrain, preventing her from falling into the crevices hidden beneath the ice. At one point, she felt her foot give way, but he jerked her back with a sudden movement, his body pressed against hers for a second that seemed to last longer than the cold itself. The contact was too quick to be intentional, but intense enough that she felt something no military training could erase. His breath, hot against her ear, mingled with the sharp sound of the wind, and for an instant, the threat outside and the invisible line between them seemed equally dangerous. He could tell because he quickly backed away, returning to his dry, commanding tone. "Stay to my left. If I stop, you stop." "Understood." She merely nodded, hiding the confusion burning inside her beneath her discipline. As they approached the base perimeter, the sound of alarms grew more distinct, now accompanied by the hurried movement of soldiers running in opposite directions. He gestured for her to follow him down a side path, avoiding the main gates. They passed behind a supply depot and entered through a secondary door, closing themselves off into a narrow corridor, shielded from the chaos outside. Inside, the air was warmer but heavy with unasked questions. He released her shoulder only when they were sure they were alone. For a moment they stood there, breathing deeply, staring at each other, unsure which question would come first. But before another word could be spoken, an officer appeared at the end of the corridor, his expression urgent, as if bearing bad news. "General, we have a problem, and the soldier needs to come too." She felt the tension rise again, this time not just from the call but because she understood. Whatever their next step, they could no longer hide their connection. And deep down, she knew This was as dangerous as whatever had been locked in the box. The corridor seemed narrower as she followed the officer who had suddenly appeared, the sound of his boots echoing like a pounding drum. The general was close behind, and she felt the weight of his presence like a constant shadow, more protective than threatening but impossible to ignore. As they approached the command room, the murmur of voices and the clanking of equipment grew louder, a sign that something serious was afoot. The doors opened automatically, revealing an overly bright space with monitors lining the wall and an entire team swiveling chairs and keyboards, searching for answers. The communications commander got straight to the point. "We've received a signal and from Sector North. Coordinates not recorded. It's weak, but steady." She froze. She knew exactly where that point was. It was close to the underground shelter, but it wasn't listed in any official documents. Her eyes met his for a quick second, and there was no need to say anything. They both knew the signal was connected to the box, and they both knew that if anyone else found out, there would be no hiding it. One of the operators, unaware of the tension between them, turned the screen to show the signal's origin. The coordinates flashed on a white, hostile map. "Do you want us to send a reconnaissance team, sir?" he asked. The general didn't respond immediately. He glanced at her almost imperceptibly, and in that instant she understood that the decision wasn't just strategic but personal. Any wrong move could expose everything. "No, we'll go ourselves." "Just the two of us," he said, and the silence that followed in the room was filled with surprise and silent disapproval. The officer who had brought them here hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "With all due respect, General, it's too risky to—" But the sentence trailed off under his firm gaze. "The order is given." With no time for further discussion, they left the room under the silent observation of the team, who seemed to sense something beyond a simple mission. As they crossed the corridor again, side by side, the world outside seemed distant, but inside the reality became more claustrophobic. They weren't just about to return to the location of the box. They were about to do so under the suspicious gaze of everyone. In the silence of the ride to the hangar, she found herself thinking about what truly connected them. It wasn't just the secret, nor the shared danger. It was the fact that somehow, since the night before, they were no longer just general and soldier. Something between them had crossed an invisible boundary, and even though she knew it could cost careers, reputations, and perhaps even lives, there was a part of her that didn't want to go back. When they entered the hangar, the reconnaissance helicopter was already waiting, its engine warming up, sending gusts of wind and snow across the ground. He signaled for her to board first, and as she buckled into the narrow seat, she sensed the mission wouldn't just be about what they'd find in Sector North. It would also be about how far they were willing to go to protect each other, and what they were willing to risk to avoid crossing the line or to cross it altogether. The roar of the blades drowned out any attempt at conversation, but it couldn't silence what was happening inside her. Every vibration of the helicopter seemed to echo directly in her chest, where her heart beat at a rhythm unrelated to the altitude or the cold seeping through the cracks in her uniform. The general sat across from her, strapped in by his seatbelt, his gaze fixed on the side window, as if calculating every meter of the route. Yet every now and then, his eyes would flick to her, and each time there was a different weight in the air, something no military protocol could erase. The horizon ahead was an endless sea of white, but she knew that what awaited them in the northern sector was more than just ice and wind. The memory of the box, the metallic sound coming from within, pulsed through her mind like a call she couldn't ignore. The closer they got, the more she felt this mission wasn't written anywhere, not even on a soldier's clear conscience. It was a foray into forbidden territory, and not just because of the artifact. At one point he leaned in slightly to speak, his voice firm but low enough for only her to hear. "Once we're there, we'll follow my instructions without hesitation, no matter what you see or hear." She nodded, but the warning sounded more like a veiled promise that she would see something that would change everything. He held her gaze for a second longer than necessary before pulling back, and in that instant she sensed there were more layers to that sentence than she would ever admit. The helicopter shook slightly as it crossed a wind current, and the pilot announced that they were just minutes from their destination. Below, small dark spots were beginning to appear in the stark white, rocks poking out of the ice, like scars from a land struggling to resist oblivion. The general gestured for her to brace herself, and the simple act of tightening her helmet and adjusting her holster felt like a ritual to calm her mind. But it didn't work. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was dense, full of things that couldn't be said here. When the helicopter landed, the crosswind nearly knocked them over, forcing them to move side by side until they reached solid ground. There, in the middle of nowhere, there was only the deafening sound of the blades, which soon began to move away, taking with them any trace of support or witnesses. Now, it was just the two of them, surrounded by miles of ice and silence. He checked his handheld GPS, but before starting the walk he turned to her. "From here, if anyone finds out we're here, everything ends." He didn't explain if everything meant the mission or what was between them. She nodded again, and as they began to move forward side by side, the physical proximity became inescapable. The cold bit, the wind pushed, but the real impact was that each step forward took them further away from the rules and closer to something not even ice could freeze. And deep down she knew that at the end of this walk, no matter what they encountered, the line she had sworn never to cross was already behind them. The wind howled like an ancient voice, pushing a thin, icy mist against them, rendering visibility almost nil. Still, the general walked steadily, guided by the portable GPS, whose screen blinked like a fragile beacon amidst the vast white expanse. She, a few steps behind, kept her gaze divided between the treacherous terrain and his figure, advancing as if bearing not only the responsibility of the mission, but also the weight of something he would never fully reveal. Each icy gust sapped the heat from his body, but there was another kind of heat, silent, uncomfortable and inevitable, that lingered there, burning beneath the layers of fabric. When the device finally beeped, indicating they had reached the exact spot, they found themselves facing a formation of ice and rock, partially covered by drifting snow. There was a narrow crevice, barely visible to the untrained eye, but wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. The general bent down to inspect the entrance and, without looking back, said, "Here, this is where the signal comes from." His dry tone didn't hide the tension, and she knew that if they were about to enter, it wouldn't be in an ordinary space. They walked for a few meters down an uneven corridor that seemed carved by nature itself, until the light from outside disappeared completely, and darkness swallowed everything. He turned on a small flashlight, revealing damp, narrow walls that led to a metal door set into the rock. There was no visible lock, only a hand-operated locking mechanism, corroded by time. The general turned it with effort, and the metallic creak echoed too loudly, as if the sound carried through the ice for miles. The space that revealed itself was a narrow room with a low ceiling and walls lined with old iron plates. In the center, a table covered in layers of dust held objects that didn't belong to that era. Decades-old radio equipment, military files with faded seals, and another box, smaller than the last, but with the same dark wood pattern and worn inscriptions. Her heart raced, and without realizing it, she took a step forward, as if being pulled by an instinct she didn't understand. He blocked her path with his arm, holding her elbow. His touch was firm, but his gaze said something else, a silent warning, mixed with something unspoken. "Don't touch. We don't know yet if it's active." She wanted to ask what active meant, but his silence, along with his controlled breathing, was proof that the answer would come at the right time, or never. Before they could argue, a deep, steady sound vibrated beneath their feet, as if something were awakening underground. The general released her arm only to approach the box, running his hand over the embossed inscriptions as if confirming an old suspicion. And in that instant, she understood. Everything that had begun in the war room, all the glances they pretended didn't exist, all the risks they were taking, it all converged on that moment, in that enclosed space where the cold and silence hid more than any regulations could have predicted. The air inside the room seemed denser, as if every particle carried static electricity. She couldn't tell if it was the chill running down her spine, or if the weight of his gaze fixed on the box left her unable to breathe normally. The general brought the flashlight closer, and the light revealed that the inscriptions on the wood weren't just random markings. There were repeating symbols, almost forming a pattern, and some of them were identical to those engraved on the box they had left at the base. As he ran his hand over the lid, something happened. A dull sound, like the crack of ice breaking, echoed from within, and suddenly a slight vibration ran through the metal of the table. She instinctively took a step back, but to her surprise, the vibration intensified just as she retreated. The general noticed. He turned to her, his eyes narrowed, assessing not only the phenomenon, but its possible connection to her presence. "Come closer," he ordered, and she hesitated for a moment, aware that obeying meant exposing herself to something she didn't understand. But her feet moved almost on their own, closing the distance. At the same moment, the sound and vibration inside the box intensified, as if reacting to her approach. He said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw twitched, the only sign that this confirmed a fear he'd long harbored. She reached out slowly, and before she could touch the wood, he grabbed her wrist, his firm, warm pressure contrasting with the biting cold around him. The gesture was one of restraint, but also of protection, as if the simple act of touching could cost him dearly. For a second they stood still, the sound of their breathing mingling with the low hum that filled the room. Whatever was inside seemed alive, conscious, and somehow connected to her in a way even he couldn't explain. Then a loud snap rent the air, and one of the rusty locks fell onto the table by itself, spinning slowly before stopping. He stepped back, pulling it with him, and the silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. "This changes everything," he murmured. And he wasn't just talking about the mission. The way he looked at her then, the flashlight illuminating half his face, said clearly that what united them now was stronger than any regulations, and that it would only become more dangerous from now on. Outside, a muffled crash sent small stones falling from the ceiling. The surrounding ice seemed to be giving way. He released her wrist, but didn't look at her, and said in a low tone that was a mixture of command and promise, "If we get out of here, nothing will ever be the same." The sound of the ice giving way wasn't just distant. It now vibrated through the floor and walls, as if the underground itself were about to crack. The flashlight in the general's hand wavered, casting shifting shadows across the iron plates lining the room. She glanced at the box, still with 2 locks attached, and felt an almost irrational urge to open it completely, as if something inside was silently calling to her, promising answers no one had ever given her. The general noticed the shift in her gaze even before she approached. "This is no time for impulses," he said, his voice firm but carrying an almost personal tone, as if he were asking more than ordering. Yet he himself seemed torn. The ice crackled again, closer this time, the sound mingling with the low hum still emanating from the box, as if the object sensed danger and wanted to react. She approached, ignoring his warning, and this time he didn't stop her immediately. He stood still, watching every gesture, as if trying to calculate the consequences before they happened. Her fingertips lightly touched the worn wood, and an unexpected heat coursed through her skin, so intense it made her hold her breath. The vibration increased, almost like a heartbeat racing beneath her hand, and then a second crack echoed. The second lock fell, sliding across the table to rest on the floor. He stepped forward, placing himself beside her, so close that the warmth of their bodies almost offset the chill of the room. "If we open it now, there's no going back," he said, his tone conveying both the gravity of the situation and a subtext unrelated to the box. Her eyes met his, and in that instant the sound of the ice, the cold, and even the mission seemed to dissolve. All that remained was that choice, open or flee. A new crash, louder and closer, shook the ceiling, sending dust and ice shards raining down on her shoulders. The general's hand closed on her shoulder, firm, almost urgent. "We have 30 seconds before this all collapses." The dilemma turned to pure urgency. The box or survival, the secret or safety. The line between duty and desire seemed thinner than ever, and for a moment she felt that, whatever the choice, they would both be crossing something they could not undo. He then released her shoulder but didn't look at her, waiting for her decision as if it were hers, not his, who held the power to change what would come next. In the silence that followed, the ice cracked again, as if even the earth itself was waiting to see what they would do. The sound of the creaking walls turned into a dull roar, as if the ice itself were protesting their presence. The general kept the flashlight fixed on the box, but his eyes were on her, waiting for a decisive gesture. She felt the weight of that moment, as if she were holding something invisible, something unseen, but which could completely change what they were and what they would be from then on. Her rapid breathing mingled with the constant humming coming from within the wood, each pulse synchronized with her heartbeat. She stepped forward and placed both hands on the box. The heat she felt was unnatural, too intense for the freezing environment. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined that perhaps the heat wasn't coming from within the object, but from everything surrounding her at that moment, including him. The general said nothing, simply moved close enough for her to feel the light brush of his shoulder against hers. There was no intentional touch, but the proximity was enough to ignite something that had been pent up since the night in the war room. With a swift movement, she lifted the lid. A faint beam of golden light escaped from the opening, illuminating the dust suspended in the air like living particles. Inside, there was no technology, no weaponry, but rather a collection of aged envelopes and notebooks, each bearing military markings and handwritten notes. Among them, a diary with a cracked leather cover bore a name, hers. Not her full name, but her first, written in the same handwriting she would recognize anywhere. His. The impact was so profound that she almost forgot the sound of the collapse, which was beginning to echo louder. Her hands trembled as she quickly flipped through the pages, seeing records of past missions, old photos, and descriptions of events that seemed to chronicle her own life before she even joined the army. It was impossible. He watched her with an expression that mixed heaviness, guilt, and a quiet kind of surrender. "Now you understand why it couldn't fall into the wrong hands," he said softly, almost drowned out by the crash that shook the ceiling. The ice gave way somewhere behind them, and a gust of bitter wind swept through the room, extinguishing the fragile light from the lantern. He closed the box in a swift movement and tucked it under his arm, extending his free hand to her. "Let's go." This time, there was no hierarchy, no command, just the raw urgency of someone unwilling to leave her behind. She took his hand and they ran down the narrow corridor, guided only by memory and instinct, the floor trembling beneath their feet. With every step, she knew she was carrying more than a forbidden object. She was carrying answers she didn't yet understand, and a bond that was now sealed not by a touch but by a secret they both shared, and that could never be told. The tunnel exit opened before them like a wound in the endless white. The frigid air bit hard into their faces, but the feeling of breathing freely, even in the brutal wind, was almost a relief. Behind them, the sound of ice giving way continued, a low rumble that swallowed the subterranean space until nothing remained. The general held the box close to his body, as if carrying not wood and paper, but something alive as he pulled it firmly by the hand, ensuring that no missteps were made. As the helicopter appeared in the distance, the whir of its blades slowly swallowed the suffocating silence. The pilot, distressed, shouted something that was lost in the wind, but his expression of urgency said it all. There was no time for questions. They boarded quickly, and the ice below began to crack in circular patterns, as if something invisible was trying to emerge. From the air the sight was even stranger, a mark in the exact shape of the symbol carved into the box, now forever etched into the white surface. During the flight back, neither of them spoke. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his hand still gripped the box as if letting go were impossible. She, in turn, couldn't stop thinking about the diary and what she'd seen inside. The pages not only recorded details of her life before she even met him, they also contained notes about missions that never officially took place, missions in which she was central. It was as if her entire trajectory had been predicted, calculated, or shaped. When they landed at the base, they were greeted by officers demanding immediate reports. The general dismissed them with his usual authority, but without letting go of the box. He took her straight to the war room, closed the door and simply stared at her for a few too long seconds. Then he placed the box on the table, opened it, and removed the diary, gently pushing it toward her. "It's your right to know, but the choice of what to do with it is yours alone." She flipped through it again, feeling the weight of each written line, each pasted photo, until she found a last page she hadn't seen before. On it, a short sentence written in his same handwriting. "If you ever read this, it means the line has been crossed, and I have accepted the consequences." It was at that moment that he understood the silent karma that loomed over them. He had spent his life avoiding involvement, keeping every relationship disciplined, but fate, or perhaps something much more human, had placed her at the center of his greatest weakness. The box, the diary, the secret, it was all just the universe's way of exacting a price for years of absolute control. She closed the diary wordlessly and looked him in the eye. There was no accusation, no promise, just a mutual acknowledgement of what they had lost and what they had gained. And as the distant sound of alarms echoed through the base again, they knew that from now on, the line could not be broken. If this story has kept you hooked so far, just imagine what's to come. The next chapter will reveal secrets that even they haven't dared to admit out loud. Like now, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out and get ready. What comes next will completely change your opinion of them.